From the soundtrack to the film Code 46, that was the music of David Holmes, and that track was called Shanghai, which is going to be quite fitting for the table we already set with the upcoming visit from our paymaster. Ladies and gentlemen, we're well into hour number 2 of this 201st episode from Media Monarchy. My name's James Evan Pilato. I'm your host and webmaster of the site and show MediaMonarchy.com, your source for alternative news, politics, conspiracies, and cover-ups, coming to you live, as always, every Friday from the Portland Radio Authority, PRAradio.org, and, of course, thanks to the fine affiliates like ZeroPointRadio.com, RevereRadio.net, and all the other fantastic stations. That break wasn't nearly long enough, and as was just noted in the chat room over on ZeroPointRadio.com, God, you gotta love dystopian synth music. But yes, we set the table before that dystopian synth music break to go into our first story we covered on the latest episode of NewWorldNextWeek.com, a weekly video series with CorbettReport.com. Geithner says U.S. insolvent. This from LouRockwell.com. The U.S. government is insolvent. Who says so? Geithner, the Secretary of the Treasury. Geithner sent a letter to Congress on January 6th asking for the debt limit to be raised. If it is not raised, he warned, the U.S. will default on its debt. In his words, quote, "Never in our history has Congress failed to increase the debt limit when necessary. Failure to raise the limit would precipitate a default by the United States." He didn't say that the government will be inconvenienced. He didn't say that the government would be forced to muddle through by delaying payments, raising taxes, and cutting non-obligatory programs and services. He said the government will default. This means that the government doesn't have enough cash to pay its obligations to the many and sundry persons whom it owes cash unless Congress authorizes an issue of even more debt. And hell, why not? It's all coming from the creature from Jekyll Island. It's all money as debt, made out of thin air. And we can really flesh it out with all our related econocrash updates from NPR. The Federal Reserve becomes the most profitable bank in U.S. history. The Financial Times, that aforementioned mouthpiece to the elites, reports that the financial crisis has helped the U.S. Federal Reserve become the most profitable bank in history. According to the Fed, it turned an $80.9 billion with a B profit in 2010. $76.2 billion of that came from securities the Fed bought during the financial crisis. The bank sent $78.4 billion of that profit to the U.S. Treasury. The Financial Times explains that the Fed sends most of its profit to the Treasury instead of recapitalizing itself. And there's always the possibility these profits won't hold up in the future. From Anti-Fascist Calling, Alan Stanford, someone we have not really reported on very extensively here. And again, like so many of these cases, sometimes we focus on individual events and sometimes we don't get into them. But they all have their own laundry list of sinister forces. Alan Stanford's trial has been indefinitely delayed because the suspected CIA banker has become drug dependent while in federal custody. The strange case of accused swindler and suspected CIA banker R. Alan Stanford became a whole lot stranger last week. During a preliminary hearing in Houston, U.S. District Judge David Hittner ruled that Stanford, charged with orchestrating an $8 billion Ponzi scheme that defrauded thousands of investors, cannot be tried until he undergoes detoxification for a drug addiction required after his incarceration in a federal detention facility. Talk about a convenient turn of events. Quote, "Nothing can be done until the medical aspect is cleared up," end quote, Hittner told defense lawyers and prosecutors during an all-day hearing that examined Stanford's mental competence to stand trial, Bloomberg News reported. The banker's court-appointed defense team is seeking a 2-year delay citing the mountain of evidence, some 2 million pages at last count, they must review before the trial can proceed. Stanford's apparent inability to participate in his own defense would certainly complicate matters. With a net worth once estimated at $2 billion, the accused fraudster was declared indigent last fall after his assets were seized and known accounts frozen following his 2009 arrest and indictment. That coming from Anti-Fascist Calling and more fantastic work from Tom Burkhart. And then we move to allgov.com, where taxes go up for lowest income Americans. Surprise, surprise. It turns out that the great tax compromise hammered out between Obama-Saya and congressional Republicans will not prevent taxes from going up for many Americans, mainly low-income earners. An analysis of the tax bill by the Urban Institute Brookings Tax Policy Center shows that 67% of individuals in the lowest earning group will pay more this year in taxes. That would be the 20% who earn less than $18,000 a year. The source of the tax hike lies with the government's decision to replace the Making Work Pay tax credit in 2010 with a 2% reduction in the payroll tax rate in 2010. This change could have been designed in a way that avoided an increase for most low-wage workers. That's low-wage workers. As we've already noted, they're becoming high-wage workers. And I don't think I need to continue. You get the point. Everybody knows the dice are loaded. And we move to Reuters. U.S. 2010 home foreclosures top 1 million for the first time. Banks seized more than 1 million U.S. homes in 1 year for the first time last year, despite a slowdown in the last few months as questions around foreclosure processing arose, a leading firm said on Thursday. Banks foreclosed on 69,847 properties in December alone, bringing the year's total to 1.05 million, topping the prior record of the previous year to that. Again, money to wage wars of aggression abroad based on lies. State of the art of warfare. And those are all our related econocrash updates posted to the bottom of our Geithner Says U.S. Insolvent post. So now we turn, for the remainder of this 201st episode from MediaMonarchy.com, for everyone's favorite, it's the News Purge. The January 13th News Purge. Good, clean fun for the whole damn family, which we heard in our intro song from Emergency Broadcast Network. Of course, their landmark 1995 record. Telecommunication Breakdown had a huge effect on me, and I use a lot of the bits from that album as some of my imaging and music beds and bumpers and all the channel changing and things that I've grabbed from there and remixed and added to. But again, it's been such a source of so many things, that album from Emergency Broadcast Network. And I recall it was the last album I bought before I moved away to college in '95. Just turning 18, and that album, which is landmark and has become quite the cult classic, is notable on many levels, but one for being pretty much the first enhanced multimedia CD release. It even came with a 3-inch floppy disk and had interactive videos that you could remix on the fly, and it was just amazing. Some of you may remember them for tagging along with U2 on their Zoo TV tour as an opening band, and their We Will Rock You Poppy Bush remix, again going back to the early 90s when we were saying goodbye to Poppy Bush and saying hello to Rhodes Scholar, drug runner Clinton. And yet I digress, my friends. Let's begin this January 13th News Purge, good, clean fun for the whole damn family, with 9/11 updates, with an amazing piece posted to 911blogger.com, backup communications system was miraculously switched on for exercise mode on September 10th. A special military backup network that allows communications between government and military agencies to continue during emergencies was miraculously switched on the day before 9/11, and so was already operational when the terrorist attacks in New York and at the Pentagon took place. The Special Routing Arrangement Service, SRAS, was, for reasons unknown, turned on for exercise mode on September 10th, 2001, and was therefore ready to be utilized the following day when there was a national emergency like that for which it was intended. The SRAS is the responsibility of a little-known government agency called the National Communications System, NCS, which works to keep critical telecommunications functioning during emergencies and played a crucial role in the government's response to the 9/11 attacks, helping to maintain and restore communications networks. Furthermore, the SRAS is related to continuity of government, a plan that was activated for the first time during the attacks. Brenton Green, the director of the NCS on 9/11, told the 9/11 Commission that on 9/10, quote, miraculously, the SRAS system was turned on for exercise mode and thus it was ready to function on 9/11, end quote. Therefore, when the NCS was required to assist the government's response to the terrorist attacks, quote, SRAS was already in exercise mode and operational. The SRAS supports the highly secret Continuity of Government COG plan, which is intended to keep the government functioning in the event of an attack on the U.S. The NCS's involvement in COG was one of the agency's three main programs. As Green told the 9/11 Commission, quote, the main communication systems of the country must be kept going or no one can communicate, end quote. The SRAS provides, quote, a vehicle for continuity of operations by providing survivable communications linkages to federal and defense end users over the public network, end quote, according to a Department of Homeland Security publication. Apparently describing the SRAS, Green told the 9/11 Commission, quote, there's a separate network linking the National Coordinating Center and the major carriers and networks as a backup. The National Coordinating Center in Arlington, Virginia, is the operational arm of the NCS. This network proved its value as a separate link on 9/11 because it coordinated network use between network operation centers while the telecommunications network was saturated. Furthermore, again apparently describing the SRAS, Green said, quote, in the situation where continuity of government is put into play, as was the case on September 11th, there is a communication system where no one can trace the site of the call on the other end. So the question, was the NCS involved in a training exercise on 9/11? Green apparently did not tell the 9/11 Commission why the SRAS was turned on for exercise mode on September 10th, but a possible explanation that needs to be investigated is that the NCS was scheduled to participate in a training exercise on September 11th. We know that the NCS was, in 2001, part of the Department of Defense, and several U.S. military agencies are known to have been conducting exercises on the morning of 9/11. For example, NORAD was running its annual exercise, Vigilant Guardian, and STRATCOM was holding its annual exercise, Global Guardian. Might the NCS have been participating in one of these or another exercise? Furthermore, it's worth noting that beginning at 8 a.m. on 9/11, representatives from the CIA gave a briefing to the NCS at a secure facility outside of Washington, D.C., where they discussed the threat that international terrorists pose to America's telecommunications infrastructure. Along with Brenton Green, the briefing was attended by representatives from 7 other federal agencies and more than 40 tech and communications companies. The private sector representatives were all, quote, senior executives from their respected companies and all had government security clearances that granted them access to the most sensitive intelligence data, end quote, relating to threats to the nation's telecommunications infrastructure, according to journalist and author Dan Verton. Topics discussed during the briefing included the growing terrorist threat to telecommunications infrastructure, the information warfare capabilities of foreign nations, and the possibility of a strategic cyber attack on critical U.S. infrastructures committed by a foreign nation or terrorist group. Considering that the NCS's special routing arrangement service had been switched on for exercise mode the previous day, and considering the topics that were discussed, might this briefing have been an introduction for a training exercise, perhaps preparing participants for a scenario based around a simulated attack against the telecommunications network? Continuity of government was activated for the first time on 9/11.